The United States military maintains approximately 1.3 million active duty personnel across all service branches. That number represents the culmination of decades of recruitment, training, and retention efforts designed to sustain an all-volunteer force capable of meeting global commitments. For years, the model worked. But that model was built on assumptions that are no longer holding. Right now, 200,000 American troops are deployed in two major theaters. 85,000 are engaged in operations related to the conflict with Iran. Another 115,000 are positioned in the Pacific, primarily in Japan, South Korea, and Guam, ready to respond to potential Chinese aggression or a crisis on the Korean Peninsula. That represents roughly 15% of the total active force committed to two regions where the potential for sustained high-intensity combat is real. The remaining 1.1 million are distributed across training commands, administrative functions, homeland defense, rotational forces preparing for deployment, personnel recovering from previous deployments, and smaller commitments in Europe, Africa, and elsewhere. On paper, the numbers suggest capacity remains. In practice, the system is approaching breaking point. Military deployments operate on rotation cycles. A typical combat deployment lasts 9 to 12 months. After returning, units and personnel require time to reset, retrain, and prepare for the next deployment. The standard ratio is one deployment for every 18 months at home station. That ratio ensures that forces remain ready, that equipment is maintained, that families are not destroyed by constant absence, and that service members do not burn out. Maintaining that ratio with current deployment levels means that the 200,000 currently deployed require a pool of approximately 600,000 personnel available for rotation. The remaining 500,000 are engaged in training new recruits, maintaining institutional knowledge, performing essential garrison functions, and fulfilling commitments that cannot be deferred. The math is tight, and it assumes that recruitment continues at planned levels, that retention remains stable, and that no additional deployments are required. None of those assumptions are currently valid. Recruitment has fallen dramatically. The Department of Defense set a goal of recruiting 60,000 new soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in 2025. As of mid-year, actual recruitment stood at 41,000. The shortfall of 19,000 represents a 31% gap between target and reality. If that trend continues, the annual recruitment deficit will reach 38,000 by year's end. The reasons for the recruitment crisis are multiple. The economy is strong, and civilian employment opportunities are abundant. Young people who might have considered military service as a path to education, training, or economic stability can find those things in the civilian labor market without the risks and demands of military life. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which lasted nearly 2 decades, created a generation of veterans who returned home with visible and invisible wounds. Stories of trauma, difficulty reintegrating into civilian life, and inadequate support from the Department of Veterans Affairs have circulated widely. Potential recruits and their families are aware of these stories. The willingness to accept the risks of military service has diminished. Social media has amplified this effect. Combat footage from the Iran conflict circulates on platforms that reach millions of young people daily. Videos of ships burning after missile strikes, aircraft shot down, casualties being evacuated. The sanitized narratives of earlier conflicts where media was controlled and imagery was curated no longer apply. The reality of war is visible in real time, and it is not appealing. Trust in institutions has eroded. Polling shows that confidence in military leadership, while still higher than many other institutions, has declined. High-profile scandals, reports of sexual assault and harassment that went unaddressed, and perceptions that senior leaders prioritize careerism over the welfare of troops have damaged the military's reputation as an honorable profession. Retention is also suffering. Service members who have completed initial commitments are choosing not to re-enlist. The combination of repeated deployments, family strain, and disillusionment with leadership has pushed many to leave. Exit surveys cite a consistent set of grievances: too much time away from home, inadequate support for families, a sense that the mission is unclear and that sacrifices are not producing meaningful results. The consequences of these trends compound over time. Each recruitment shortfall means fewer personnel available to fill units. Each retention loss removes experienced personnel whose knowledge and leadership are difficult to replace. The force is simultaneously shrinking and losing institutional competence. The deployment of 200,000 troops to 2 theaters exacerbates the problem. Units that have already deployed are being told to prepare for additional rotations sooner than planned. The 18-month home station time is being compressed to 12 months in some cases. Soldiers and Marines are being asked to deploy again before they have fully recovered from the previous deployment. The strain is visible in readiness metrics. Units that should be rated as fully mission-capable are reporting equipment shortages, personnel gaps, and training deficiencies. Maintenance backlogs are growing because there are not enough technicians to service equipment that has been used heavily in combat. Training ranges are overbooked because units are trying to prepare for deployment on compressed timelines. Military families are bearing the burden. Spouses are managing households alone while their partners deploy repeatedly. Children are growing up with a parent absent for significant portions of their childhood. Divorce rates among military families have increased. Mental health services are overwhelmed by demand. The promise that military service, while demanding, would provide stability and support for families is being broken by the operational tempo. Pentagon planners have been running war games to assess the implications of current force structure against potential threats. One scenario involves a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. The assessment concluded that defending Taiwan would require deploying an additional 300,000 to 500,000 personnel to the Pacific theater. Those forces do not exist. The United States currently has 115,000 in the Pacific. Even if every available soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine were sent to the region, the number would fall short of what the scenario requires. The conclusion is stark. The United States cannot simultaneously fight in Iran and defend Taiwan. It lacks the personnel to do both. Strategic choices would have to be made. Resources would have to be prioritized. One commitment would have to be abandoned or accepted as a loss. This reality has prompted discussions that were previously unthinkable. The selective service system, which requires all males between the ages of 18 and 25 to register, has existed since 1980. Registration is mandatory, but no one has been drafted since 1973. The all-volunteer force, established after the Vietnam War, has been a cornerstone of American military policy for over 50 years. But now, quietly and cautiously, some officials are asking whether conscription needs to be reconsidered. Not as an immediate measure, not as a public proposal, but as a contingency that might become necessary if current trends continue. The political obstacles are immense. Public opinion polls show that 72% of Americans oppose reinstating the draft. Among the age cohort that would be most affected, 18 to 25-year-olds, opposition reaches 89%. The memory of Vietnam, when young men were conscripted to fight in a war that many considered unjust, remains powerful. The phrase "hell no, we won't go" is part of the cultural lexicon. Politicians understand that advocating for a draft is political suicide. Whichever party proposes it will face immediate and overwhelming backlash. Young voters, whose turnout has been increasing, would mobilize against any candidate or party associated with conscription. Parents of draft-age children would join them. The electoral consequences would be devastating, but the military necessity is becoming harder to ignore. Commanders need personnel, units are understaffed, deployment rotations are unsustainable, and recruitment is not recovering. The gap between what the military requires and what the volunteer force can provide is widening. Alternative solutions have been proposed. One option is to expand the use of private military contractors. Companies like those that operated in Iraq and Afghanistan could be hired to perform functions currently handled by uniformed personnel. Contractors could provide security, logistics, maintenance, and even some combat roles. The advantages are that contractors can be hired quickly without the political costs of a draft. They are not subject to the same deployment rotation constraints, and if they are killed or wounded, the political impact is less severe than casualties among uniformed troops. The disadvantages are significant. Contractors are expensive, often costing 2 to 3 times as much as equivalent military personnel. Accountability is weak. Contractors are not subject to military justice and have, in previous conflicts, been involved in incidents that damaged America's reputation and credibility. Relying heavily on contractors also raises questions about whether the United States is outsourcing its national defense to profit-driven corporations. Another option is to mobilize the National Guard more extensively. There are approximately 440,000 National Guard personnel across the country. Currently, about 50,000 are on active duty supporting various missions. The remaining 390,000 could, in theory, be mobilized for federal service. But the National Guard is not designed for sustained overseas deployment. Guard members have civilian jobs and families. Mobilizing them for extended periods disrupts their lives and imposes costs on employers and communities. Previous large-scale Guard mobilizations during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars led to significant political and social pushback. Governors who share authority over the Guard resisted federal mobilizations that depleted their states of resources needed for disaster response and other emergencies. A third option is to extend deployment lengths. Instead of 9 to 12 months, deployments could be lengthened to 15 or 18 months. This would reduce the frequency of rotations and make existing personnel cover more of the operational demand. The problem is that extended deployments destroy morale and accelerate personnel losses. Divorce rates spike. Mental health deteriorates. Service members who might have stayed in the military choose to leave rather than face another extended separation from their families. The short-term relief from extended deployments is offset by long-term retention losses that make the underlying problem worse. Congress has been briefed on these issues. Classified hearings have presented the data. Recruitment shortfalls, retention declines, deployment tempo unsustainability, the gap between requirements and capacity. Lawmakers from both parties have expressed concern. But concern has not translated into action because there are no good options. Increasing military pay and benefits might help with recruitment and retention, but the fiscal cost is enormous and the results are uncertain. Ending the conflict with Iran would reduce deployment demands, but that would require diplomatic or military outcomes that are not currently achievable. Accepting reduced global commitments would free up forces, but that raises questions about American credibility and the willingness of allies to rely on U.S. security guarantees. The debate over selective service reinstatement remains theoretical. No formal proposal has been introduced. No vote has been scheduled. But the fact that it is being discussed, even in closed sessions, reflects the severity of the manpower crisis. Military historians note parallels to earlier periods. Before World War II, the United States had a small standing army. When war came, conscription was necessary to build the force required. The draft continued through the Cold War because the threat was existential and sustained. It ended after Vietnam because the war was unpopular and the military concluded that an all-volunteer force would be more effective. The current situation is different. The threats are real but not existential in the way that World War II or the Cold War were. The conflicts are protracted and costly but do not threaten the survival of the nation. Public support is weak, and the military needs personnel, but not in the numbers that would require mass conscription. The most likely outcome is that the United States will continue with the current model, accepting the limitations it imposes. Deployments will remain high, units will be strained, recruitment and retention will struggle, and strategic choices will be constrained by the reality that there are not enough soldiers to do everything the nation might want its military to do. The all-volunteer force was built on the assumption that America could attract enough qualified personnel by offering opportunity, education, and a sense of service. That assumption is being tested, and the answer emerging from the data is uncomfortable. The model is breaking under the weight of sustained, multi-theater commitments that the public does not fully support and that offer no clear path to resolution. The United States has 1.3 million troops. 200,000 are deployed. And the gap between what is required and what is available is growing.